Okay, so we are on Kufal Amid Base 132b, and we're learning about the basis for doing a bris on Shabbos, or doing it on Yantif, even though that it would be a malacha when you're allowed to do it when you're not. And we also are learning about that you can remove the foreskin even if there's a leprosy, a tzaras on there, where the Torah says that you may not remove a tzaras. You have to guard it and keep it, and yet you're allowed to remove a tzaras. And we had a brisa which taught that you could, on the basis of the word basar, that you could do a bris even if though there's a tzaras there. And then the Gemara, and then the brisa said, well, maybe actually you cannot, and therefore we have this special teaching of basar. So we saw Abaya's interpretation yesterday, and now we're going to see Rava's interpretation. Rava, this is about 10, 12 lines from the bottom. Rava Amar Mila Bizmana Doicha Letzricha Kra. So Rava says, actually, I don't need a pasuk to tell you that you can do a bris on Shabbos if it's the 8th day. That we don't need a pasuk for, because actually we have a kavachama, we have a logical conclusion on a basis of the strength of it. Uma Shabbos the Chamira Doicha Tzaras. If bris tzaras lekol shekin, if I don't need so I don't need a pasuk to tell you that a bris in the correct time can be done even though there's a leprosy there which you're not allowed to remove. How do I know that? Because since I know that a bris can be done on Shabbos, and if you can do a bris on Shabbos for sure. Which is Shabbos is a strict prohibition. For sure, you could do a bris when there's a leprosy there because that's a much lesser prohibition than Shabbos. Amalei Rav Safra l'Rava, so Rav Safra challenged Rava. How do you know that? How do you know that Shabbos and tzaras, that the tzaras is the lesser, and if bris can supersede Shabbos, for sure it can supersede tzaras. How do you know that Shabbos is stricter? Maybe tzaras is actually stricter, and the basis for thinking that we saw earlier in the Gemara was on account of Shabbos has so many prohibitions, so for sure it's going to be stricter than tzaras. The Gemara says no, because if you make the calculation we saw yesterday at the top of the page, tzaras could be stricter on account of shekain doichas avoda. Because tzaras, even though a kohen has an obligation to do the service in the Beis HaMikdash, avodah in the Beis HaMikdash, nevertheless, tzaras will stop him if he has a leprosy. This tzaras, which we're calling leprosy, if he has a tzaras, he may not do the service. So you see that tzaras is stronger than the service in the Beis HaMikdash, and the service of the Beis HaMikdash is stronger than Shabbos because you do the service on Shabbos as well. You shecht and you light a fire for the altar, for the mizbeach, and you burn the offering on the mizbeach. So if we go through the hierarchy, if tzaras is stronger than the service, the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash, because it stops the kohen from doing the service, and avodah in the Beis Hamikdash is stronger than Shabbos because that supersedes that. So then, for sure, tzaras is stronger than Shabbos.
Does it play into it that avodah is a mitzvah say and say is doiche loisa say, and even though tzaras is doiche?
Sorry,
I'm saying tzaras is a loisa say that's doiche an asay of avodah. Is that right?
Well, actually, it may be. The Gemara earlier said that it's asay and a los asay. It's a positive and a negative. So it says you have to protect the tzaras and you have to keep the tzaras. You have to keep what is said. So it's a positive and a negative. Asay velos. So it says no. That's not a Rava's response to Rav Kana. No, that's not a good comparison to say that the fact that Tzaras doesn't allow the Kohen to do the service tells you that Tzaras is stronger than Shabbos. No, not because the Tzaras is stricter. This person can't do the service because he has this tumah. That's what the Gemara thinks right now. So he's tameh, he's ritually impure, he has a tzaras, and therefore he cannot do the avodah. The Gemara says, why? Why is he considered a gavra lechazi, a person that can't do the avodah? Let him just cut off the tzaras and do the service because he has a mitzvah and the tzaras is blocking it. So let's just say that you can get rid of the tzaras in order to do the mitzvah. Well, actually, he needs another step as well. He has to go to the mikveh. It's not just that he has the leprosy, the tumah, but he has the mikveh as well. What about Negoim Taharim? Well, actually, there's a nega that's tar. You can have this tzaras, what we call leprosy, but we have tzaras that is over the entire body, and therefore he will be exempt. It will be tar. It doesn't mean anything, and then he doesn't have to go to the mikvah either. Michael Amema, Elam Ravashi. So rather, Ravashi said, "Hachamrina." This is what it means to say. Dasya say, b'dachilosa say, k'goy mila b'tzaras. When do we say that the positive commandment would the reason this person cannot do the avodah is because asay dechalosas. It really, like Michael was saying, but in the reverse, that really the asay supersedes the losasay. Usually, a positive commandment will supersede the negative commandment. However, that's only true if it's be'idnei, if it happens at the same time. And this is what we mentioned yesterday, that you wear tzitzis even though it has techelas, which is the wool, and you wear it even on the blue wool, even on a linen garment. Same, you do a bris, and you remove the foreskin that has the tzaras on it. But those, at the moment you're doing the bris, at the moment you're wearing the tzitzis, you're fulfilling the mitzvah and doing the transgression at the same time. So then we say, asay, the chalosa say that the positive commandment will supersede the negative commandment. However, the be'idnei the misaker lav kamoiki asay. Because at the time that the negative commandment is being done, kamoiki asay is doing the positive commandment. But over here, the Kohen who would be removing the leprosy in order to do the service, it's true that he could do that. However, but at the time that he removes the tzaras, he's actually not doing a mitzvah. It's in a prep work. It's preparatory to the mitzvah. And that's why he's a gavra lechazi. You cannot do the service because really we say, really we say the positive commandment should supersede the negative commandment. But it's only if they happen at the same time. But they're not happening at the same time. In order to, if he were to transgress the negative commandment, which is to remove the leprosy, he's not allowed to remove the leprosy and the tzaras. And he would, that wouldn't happen at the same time as the mitzvah, which is the avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. The Gemara is going to tell us that that this is actually an old machlokas. This concept of whether or not, like Rava says, that the basis for doing a bris, even though there's a tzaras there, is is a kal v'chomer from Shabbos, and Rav Kahana said that no, it's not a kal v'chomer from Shabbos. That's what we're going to see is really already in a bris. Bahad the Rabbi Rav Safra. Now we go to Kuflav and Gimel and Aleph. Tanaihi. It's a basis. It's a machlokas Tanaim. The Tanaim we learned basar, and it says the flesh of an 8-day-old child. It says in the foreskin. So basar was an extra word because it could just say yimol or lasa. You shall circumcise his foreskin, and it says yimor basar or lasa. It says the flesh to tell you that even if there's a tzaras in the flesh, and also we do a bris. Basav af b'sheisham b'eres himo liver Rabbi Yashi. That's what Rabbi Yashi says. However, Rabbi Yonasan Omer ein tzarach. I don't need a pasuk Shabbos chamura doche. If a bris can supersede Shabbos, which is strict, for sure it's tzaras. Like Kosh can, for sure it should be able to supersede the tzaras. Amar Mar Basar Afa Pishayesha Meharasima de Rabbi Yashi. Rabbi Yashi says that we do a bris even though that there's a tzaras there on the basis of that extra word basar, flesh. Halama likra. What I need a pasuk for? Even if you did it even without a pasuk, I know it's okay. If you remember, we talked about many times at Shabbos the opinion of Rabbi Shimon that a davar she'edim eskaven, when you're doing an act and you don't have any intent for it to happen, you're actually doing something else, and consequently, something else happens that's prohibited. That's fine. Davar she'edim eskaven is okay. So over here by the bris, it's a davar she'edim eskaven. I'm not trying to take off the tzaras. I'm trying to do the bris. I would do this whether the tzaras was there or not. This is not intentional to remove the tzaras. This is intentional to remove the foreskin, which is the mitzvah to do for this 8-day-old child. So what I need a pasuk for? Davar she'enim eskaven hu. It's an act that's not intentional. Davar she'enim eskaven mutter. It's permissible to be done. Amar Abai l'nitzach el Rabbi Yehuda. So Abai says you're right. We only need this according to Rabbi Yehuda, who disagrees and says Davar she'enim eskaven aser, who says that there is a prohibition to do something even if you're not intending. So that's the way Abai said. And Rava says Afilo Tema Rabbi Shimon. And Abai says no, actually, that's not considered a davar she'enim eskaven. That's not considered an act that you're not intending, because it's absolutely going to happen. And we saw this many times. It's called psikresha. I want to cut off the head of the chicken, but I don't want the chicken to die. It's an obvious thing that's going to happen. So it's for sure my act. It counts as my act. It's attributed to me. It's considered intentional. Various version of how to say what the reason is. Either it's considered my act even though it's unintentional, or it counts as if it's an intentional act because it's surely going to happen. But either way, even Rabbi Shimon would agree that is attributed to me and counts as my act. Because it's like he's saying, I want to cut off the chicken's head without it dying. So to here, I want to remove the foreskin without the tzaras coming off. Of course you want it to come off, because that's absolutely going to happen. So Gemara says, wait, and Abaye doesn't agree to this? But we've said many times, Abaye and Rava both agree that Rabbi Shimon only said this halacha that it counts as an unintentional act if it's not absolutely going to happen. But if it's absolutely going to happen, it's considered intentional. So Gemara says, you're right. Basa deshama mirava savra. After he heard this from Rava, he accepted it. He understood the logic and accepted that is indeed Rabbi Shimon's explanation. Some say this conversation between Abai and Rava didn't happen on our brisa about doing a bris and removing the tzaras, but rather on this brisa. The brisa teaches Hishama b'neged tzaras lishma ma'od v'lasas. It says be careful, guard the neged tzaras, this let's call it leprosy. Lishmar, to guard it, meaning make sure not to take it away. Lishmar ma'od, very much so. V'la'asos, and to do. What are you going to do? What is this v'la'asos, to do? What are you doing? La'asos yata ose. Aval ata ose b'siv shal gabe ragla b'mod shal gabe ksefer. So la'asos means, although you cannot directly remove it, but even if you have a leprosy on your leg, you can, at work, kick the soil and kick the sieve, the weeds or whatever this that grows around the palm tree. And if you have a leprosy, it's a ras on your shoulder, you're allowed to take the packages and beams on your shoulder because you're doing something else. And if it happens, if it gets lost, that's fine. So lasses is to tell you that you should you can go about and do your own thing, even though that one may remove the tzaras. Vim avra, and if it gets removed, it gets removed. V'halamali cross. So the Gemara there said, "What Abaye challenge? What I need a pasuk for that? That it's an unintentional act. I'm busy working. I'm busy kicking dirt. I'm not actually removing it. But therefore it should be permissible." Abaye said, "You're right. It should be permissible on the general basis of an unintentional act being permissible. But over here, we need this teaching called Rabbi Yehuda, who he holds." Who holds that because Rabbi Yehuda holds that Davar She'eino Mischaven is mutter, that when you do an unintentional act, it actually is prohibited, and it does count as an act, even though you don't intend it. Rava responded to Abaye, even Rabbi Shimon needs this teaching in the Torah that tell you that you can continue your work even though the leprosy will get removed. Because sometimes it's absolutely, you're sure it's going to remove the tzaras, and nevertheless you're allowed to do the work. And even though that generally Rabbi Shimon says that an unintentional act doesn't attribute to you in any case, but when it's for sure going to happen, it does attribute to you, and therefore we needed the Torah to say you're allowed to continue your work. Now the Gemara challenged that and said, wait, but Abaye doesn't hold that. He doesn't hold that when it's surely going to happen, it's considered an intentional act and attributed to you. That both Abaye and Rava say that Rabbi Shimon agrees by psik reisha, by cutting off the head of the chicken, that it counts as your act. Again, we say that in this case too, if this was where the conversation was said, Abaye after this accepted the concept, and then that became the halacha. And that he accepted that was the halacha, and that became his opinion as well. And that's why we say both Abaye and Rava say this. Abaye v'alibi Rabbi Shimon hay basamayavad. Fine. So at first, Abaye had thought that according to Rabbi Shimon, indeed, I don't need a teaching to tell us that you can do a bris to remove the tzaras, because it's an unintentional act, even though that he reverted to Rava's opinion and said, no, that's absolutely going to remove the tzaras, and therefore it's prohibited, even according to Rabbi Shimon. But at first he thought that Rabbi Shimon would hold that it's permissible. Well, what did he think that Rabbi Shimon was going to do with the extra word basar in the pasuk? In regards to bris, it says you will remove the flesh foreskin. Why did it not say just remove the foreskin? Maybe he thought that Rabbi Shimon uses it for when he intentionally removes the beheres. He's intentionally removing the tzaras, and he actually doesn't intend to do the bris. So you see a father holding a scalpel over a child, and it looks like he's about to do a bris, and you ask him, what are you doing? Are you doing a bris? And he says, no, I'm removing the tzaras. Now, it so happens to be that would have also done a bris, but that wasn't his intention. And there, Rabbi Shimon would say, still, the teaching of the Torah is that's okay, because since he's also removing the foreskin, so he's doing the bris, so then it's permissible, even though his intent is to remove the tzaras. And he verbalized that, and he said so. Teinar gadol. So the Gemara says, okay, that makes sense why the Torah said the word basar, the extra word of flesh, in regards to an adult, because an adult can be doing that. But for a child, an 8-day-old child, why would we say that? After all, that would be, he can't speak yet, so he can't say, I'm trying to remove the tzaras, and that would be his prohibition. Because the father is saying, I'm intending to remove the tzaras, and therefore he's not really intending to do the bris. So then we say, however, if we're going to do the bris, the best way to be done is if somebody else does it, because that person would not really care about the leprosy of the child. He's just trying to do the bris, and that's why somebody else should do it. So hire your local monk. The Amar Reb Shimon, as Reb Shimon Lekar said, "Kamakam Shat Moitza Asay v'Leisasay, Imata Yochel Lekayim Shnei Mutu v'Imlav Yavi Asay v'Yitchel Leisasay." So, because we generally say, when do we say that you're allowed to have a positive commandment supersede a negative commandment? Now say docha lo saseh. When do we say that? That's only if they happen together and there's no way to avoid it. But if you can avoid it, in other words, you have another way of doing the mitzvah, which would not break the prohibition, then of course you're not allowed to say, well, a positive commandment supersedes a negative commandment. I'm not allowed to steal, so I'm going to have a mitzvah to do a shake lulav. So my positive commandment will supersede a negative commandment. I'm going to steal in order to do lulav. No, actually, I have another way of doing it. Just purchase your own, right? Get your own. So obviously, on Yantav itself, I couldn't purchase it. But the idea is that I'm just demonstrating the concept of where you have a way to do it without the prohibition. Of course, the positive commandment does not supersede the negative commandment. So over here also, let somebody else do it, where since according to Rabbi Shimon, when there's no intention to remove the leprosy, there is no prohibition. So why are you allowing the father to do the bris, which at that time he may also intend to remove the leprosy, which is going to be a prohibition? Let somebody else do it, and then the father will, and then that person doesn't care about the leprosy, so it's a davar she'eino miskaven. It's an unintentional act, and then the positive commandment will supersede the negative commandment. Actually, there isn't a negative commandment because there's no intention, so it's just a mitzvah. So it's better to have someone else do the bris rather than the father. So the Gemara says the leka acher. There is no other. There is no one else that can do it, and therefore we tell the father, even though he intends to remove the tzaras, which is a prohibition, nevertheless the mitzvah is going to supersede that. And that's the teaching over here that's what Abai thought was the teaching of Rabbi Shimon. Amar Ma. So going back to doing a bris on Shabbos, we said that a bris on the correct time can be done on Shabbos, and a bris on the correct time can be done on Yantif. But if it is beyond the 8th day, you cannot do it on Yantif. Amar Ma. Yantif eino dechel ela bizmana. A bris can only be done on Yantif if it is in the correct time, meaning on the 8th day. So how do we know this? So we're going to have various interpretations as to what is the basis for that a bris in the correct time on the 8th day supersedes Shabbos and Yantif, and not beyond the 8th day. Chizkiya says, it says in the pasuk, it says in regards to a korban being that it must be eaten on the correct day. So korban Pesach must be eaten the night of the Seder, and you can't leave any over until the morning. That's great. And then what are you supposed to do with it? You're supposed to burn it. So what should the Torah say? The Torah should say, don't leave any over until the morning, and if you left, burn it. But that's not what it says. It says, don't leave any over till the morning, and if you left it over to the morning, then you should burn it. Now, why do you have to say to the morning again? We know that it means to the morning. So that what it means to say is a second morning. Don't leave it over until the morning of Yantif. So the Seder, you need to eat it. You didn't eat everything. You left it over until the morning. Don't leave it over to the morning, meaning Yantif morning. If you did leave it over, so to the morning you shall burn it, meaning to the next morning you have to leave it, and then you will burn it. Because you're not allowed to burn it on Yantif, because it's not a Yantif mitzvah. And it's not a part of the Yantif mitzvah, and therefore you can only burn it on Chol HaMoed on the next day. So therefore the Torah said it doesn't have to say a second time until the morning. So what does it say? A second time you leave it over to the morning must be, it's not telling you leaving it over to the morning, but rather the burning should be a second morning. So that the burning is on a second morning, so we see that something that's not a mitzvah on Yantiv, or the way that Rashi says it, anything that is a weekday mitzvah, meaning it could have been done. It really pertains to a mitzvah prior to Yantiv, like the Pesach, which is a mitzvah prior to Yantiv. It's not the mitzvah of Yantiv. Bris Milah, which could have been done on Erev Yantiv as well, because this is not the 8th day. Of course, if it's the 8th day, this is the only time you can do the mitzvah. But if it was, or the first time you can do the mitzvah. But if the 8th day was before Yantiv, so you could have done this before Yantiv, and therefore it does not supersede Yantiv. By the korban of Shabbos, it says the Ola of Shabbos shall be done on its Shabbos. Only on Shabbos and not the next day, and only on a korban of Shabbos can be done on Shabbos, but not of the previous day or any other day. You cannot do a korban from another day on Shabbos. And same on Yontif. Rava says it's from this pasuk. In regards to Yontif, we know that there's a leniency over Shabbos, in as much as that even though that cooking is a creative work, you're allowed to cook and you're allowed to do all the things that are needed for cooking. So you can add to the fire, and you can cook your food, and you can knead your dough. Anything that couldn't really be done before Yantiv, you're allowed to do on Yantiv, because it says that anything that is made for food for everyone, meaning a typical food, may be cooked. But it says, this alone may be done for you. So what is this? This alone. This, only this may be done, but not the prep work. In other words, you can't harvest wheat on Yantiv in order to make your bread. You can knead the dough in order to make your bread, because the kneading has to be done immediately prior to the baking, or very close to. But you couldn't knead the dough before Yantiv and then leave it and bake it on Yantiv, because that would not be that would flop. But you could have harvested the wheat beforehand, so that must be done beforehand. The machshirin, the prep work for something being done on Yantiv may not be done on Yantiv. Levado, this alone. What does the alone tell me? That's to tell you that so too the mitzvah that could have done beforehand, like a bris that could have been done before Yantiv, you cannot do on Yantiv. Which is a kal v'chomer, and this is the kal v'chomer. Just as tzaras, which supersedes the avodah, meaning it stops the kohen from doing the avodah, and yet you're allowed to remove the tzaras when you're doing a bris, even when it's an unintentional, even when it's beyond the correct day. So even a bris on the 9th day, the 10th day, or when a child's 10 years old, when an adult is 50 years old, even if he has a tzaras there, we saw this earlier, he can do the bris. So too, I would have said that you can have a bris even Shabbos mana supersede Yantiv. And that's why we need the teaching of Levado to tell you, or really we have the other teachings as well of Chizkiah and Abaye, to tell us that a bris that's not in the correct time cannot supersede Shabbos.
Isn't that a better analogy? You say a coin with saraz can't do avodah. Very good. A moil with saraz can't do avodah either. I mean, he can't do a milah. If a moil has saraz, he could do a milah.
Sure, why not?
He could.
Why not?
Because he has to be mechutz l'machana.
So the baby is mechutz l'machana. Why wouldn't he not? This is not a service in the Beis HaMikdash that he's not allowed to do the avodah, the service. This is a regular mitzvah. He can wear tzitzis, he can wear tefillin. So he does a bris. Even on himself.
Okay.
Avram Avinu did a bris on himself. If he had a tzaras on his arm, he would still do the bris. Rav Ashi says, Shabbosin asehu. Rav Ashi says, well, there's a positive commandment and a negative commandment in regards to Shabbos, in regards to Yantiv. Yantiv says, don't do creative work. That's a positive. That's a negative. Don't do work. And then it also says Shabbosin, a resting time, right? A time of ceasing. So we see that it's a positive commandment as well. So Yantiv is both a positive commandment and a negative commandment. So how can the bris, which is a positive commandment, a single positive commandment, supersede another positive and negative commandment? It's true that generally we say asay docha los asay. A positive commandment can supersede a negative commandment, a prohibition. But that's only if it's a prohibition alone. But if there's also an asay, a positive commandment together with that prohibition, like in Yantif, where the Torah says rest positively and don't do work negatively. So when the Torah says both in asay and alos asay, for sure the mitzvah of bris cannot supersede that. And therefore, I need a special teaching to tell me that that you are allowed to do a bris if it's the correct time, and that's it. However, all this is according to Rabbi Shimon. Up until now, we were talking about Rabbi Shimon, with the Chachamim agree to Rabbi Shimon in regards to the mitzvah itself, if the mitzvah is supposed to be done on that very day, that it supersedes Shabbos and Yantif. But the prep work, anything that could have been done before Shabbos and Yantif, such as making a knife, carrying the knife to the place, etc., that would not supersede Yantif according to Shabbos, according to Rabbanan. And Rabbi Eliezer says no. Even the machshire mitzvah are also going to supersede Shabbos and Yantiv. However, Rabbi Akiva said a general rule. Kollel Amar Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said a general rule: anything that could have been done before Shabbos and Yantiv will not supersede Shabbos and Yantiv because you could have done it beforehand, and that's the machshirim, the prep of the mitzvah. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, Halacha Rabbi Akiva. So Rav said the halacha is like Rabbi Akiva. And we have a similar teaching in regards to Korban Pesach. Korban Pesach, if the 14th day of Nisan, Erev Pesach, is Shabbos, and the Seder would be Matzah Shabbos. So what do you do with the Korban Pesach? So you have to make it on Friday. On Shabbos. On Shabbos itself, Erev Yantiv, you're going to make the Korban Pesach. That's the mitzvah. And what are you going to do? So the things that you cannot do before Yantiv, before Shabbos, so you're going to do on Shabbos. And the things that you must do on Shabbos because it must be done before Yantiv, before Pesach, great. So you're going to do it. But anything else, you're either going to do before Shabbos or after Shabbos. Anything that you can do before Shabbos will not supersede Shabbos. So there the case is talking about, let's say, if the korban has a wart. So you want to remove the wart so that the blemish goes away. You cannot do it on Shabbos. You can only do it prior to Shabbos because on Shabbos it's already too late. You could have done it before Shabbos and you didn't. So even though you have a mitzvah to do it now, if you can't use this lamb, you're not going to have a korban because there's a shortage of korbanos. Okay, but too bad. Shechita, shechting the animal, which you can't do before Shabbos. The mitzvah of shechting the animal is on the 14th day, so it has to be done that day. Derechas Shabbos, it supersedes Shabbos. And the Allah is like Rabbi Akiva, just as over there, so too here. And I need Rabbi Akiva to teach us this, or Rav to teach us that Allah is like Rabbi Akiva, both in regards to Pesach and in regards to Shabbos and Bris Milah. If we had said it only in regards to that Milah supersedes Shabbos, the leka koris. There, the machshirin that you could have done, the prep work that you could have done before Shabbos, will not supersede Shabbos. Why? The leka koris, because there is no koris on the child, because the child's still a child, and so do it the next day. So what if you're not going to do it on the 8th day? It's true, the mitzvah is on the 8th day. And if this child grows up and does not give himself a bris, because it doesn't get a bris and doesn't give it to himself, then eventually there will be the punishment of kares. But right now there's no kares. But by Korban Pesach, immediately as you miss the Korban Pesach, there's kares. That's a severe punishment. So perhaps you're allowed to do it on Shabbos. Perhaps you're allowed to do it even on Shabbos. That's why we have to say, no, even on Shabbos, you cannot do the Korban Pesach. Sorry, this is prep work. You could have done it before Shabbos. You didn't, you lose out. And if Rabbi Kiva said it by Pesach, okay, Pesach, it's a single mitzvah, even though it's an important mitzvah. You didn't prepare the carbon correctly. You cannot do it on Shabbos. Because it doesn't have the 13 covenants. Aval Mila, the Nichos Yud Gimel Britzas, but by the mitzvah of Mila, there are 13 mitzvahs, 13 covenants that have been agreed upon, whatever the word for making a covenant is. Nichos Yud Gimel Britzas and Ema Litcho Shabbos. Maybe that bris Mila is so strong that it should supersede Shabbos tzricha. That's why I have to say that even bris milah, which is such an important mitzvah and has 13 covenants with Hashem, nevertheless, if you didn't do the prep work, you cannot do it on Shabbos because you're not allowed to do the prep on Shabbos because you could have done it before. The next Mishnah tells us the various parts of bris milah that are allowed to be done on Shabbos. So osin kol tzarchei milah b'Shabbos, you're allowed to do all of the needs of a bris on Shabbos. And then it starts listing them. And the Gemara is going to ask, if you said all, why do you have to give me a list? And if you said a list, why do you have to say all? You do all needs of a bris on Shabbos. Mohalin, you can do the actual incision, removing the foreskin. Upara'in, and pulling back the under membrane. So there's an outer shaft skin, which is the foreskin that goes up to the top. And then it folds in sort of like a flap. And the inner side is a membrane that doesn't have to be removed, but it must be peeled back. So that's parin umotzitzin, and they would suction out the blood in order not to go back in, because then it can cause an infection. So you have to suck out that blood. And you put on bandaging, which is a wound protection. And you put on cumin, which is a coagulant. And and if you did not grind up the cumin before Shabbos, so you chew on it to grind it up, and then you put it on. Because you're not allowed to grind on Shabbos, and this is prep work that you could have done before Shabbos, but it's needed for the health of the baby, and so therefore you grind it, you chew it in order to grind it. And another healing agent that they did, they would whisk wine and oil together and pour it on as a healing agent, as a refuah. And if you did not whisk these together before Shabbos, you don't whisk them together, but you whisk each one separately and put it on. You're not allowed to put on a cloak. Basically, in order to keep the under membrane, the priya skin, which is really just a membrane beneath the glands, beneath the crown, so that they would put on sort of like a band, which they call a chaluk, to keep it down. That you're not allowed to do on Shabbos, create that band. But if you but rather you can just take a piece of cloth and wrap it on in order to keep it. And if you didn't bring one before Shabbos, so you wrap it on your finger, so you're basically wearing a single finger glove, and then you can carry it even from another courtyard. You're allowed to carry this even if they didn't have a joint meal made, an eruv chatzeros made. So then Gemara now analyzes. We said you could do whatever is needed, and then you give me a whole list. Mechtik tani kulu. You gave me a list of everything that can be done. So kol tzarchemila lasuya mai. So why did you first say you can do everything? What's that adding to me? Lasuya hada tanarbanan, to teach this brisa. Hamol kol zmanshu isik b'mila chayzer. Bein al tzitzin ma'akvin, bein al tzitzin sheina ma'akvin. It coming to teach another need of bris, and here we get to a little bit of nitty gritty of a bris. The mitzvah of milah is to remove the foreskin. The definition of the foreskin is the outer shaft skin that comes from the urethra all the way down to beneath the ridge of the glans of the crown. And all that outer skin is going to be orla, the foreskin. That needs to be removed. If the male left some jagged edges over there, so some of the shaft skin, which is the foreskin, is protruding above the ridge of the glands. So that really is tzitzin, is little strands, and really should be removed. But on Shabbos, if it's a kosher bris already, even though that there's these little bits, you wouldn't be allowed to remove it. So the Gemara says it depends. There are two classifications of these little strands, that the jagged edges. One is tzitzin hama'akvin. There's so much of a jagged edge or jagged edges left that it covers the majority of the ridge. And therefore, that needs to be removed. It's considered that there's still, the person is not fully circumcised. And since it needs to be removed, of course, you can go back and do that because the bris had not been completed. However, there's tzitzin she'ena ma'akvin. These strands that do not make it consider the bris is not done. These are where they are less than the majority of the ridge is covered. And therefore, you would, normally you may want to go back just to complete the mitzvah and beautify it and make it aesthetically nice and neat. However, but on Shabbos, you couldn't just go back for that. If there's no mitzvah, then you couldn't go back on Shabbos and do some cosmetic surgery. And therefore, the halach is this. If you're still standing in the midst of doing the bris and you notice that there's a ridge, there's a little bit of a strand, so you can snip it because you're still in the midst of doing the bris. But once you completed the bris, meaning you stop doing the bris and now you're into bandaging already, or it may be in bandaging, but you've completed the bandaging, then you cannot go back and fix that ridge on Shabbos. And that's what it says. You can do all the needs of a bris, and for that it means you can do the needs of the bris on Shabbos, meaning to fix up the tzitzin she'enan ma'akvin, these strands that are not really going to make the bris invalid, but while you're there, you can complete.
The dinim of the tzitzin, that's all midoraisas, or that's also midorabanas?
No, these are Torah. This is the definition of a Torah definition of what is foreskin.
It's halach l'moshe b'Sinai, or
like any mitzvah. Every mitzvah has its shiurim, right? How do you know what a mitzvah is? It has to have a measure, so we know that's the foreskin. So. Tana Rabbanan, the Brisa taught, Hamalas calls Manchu Isaac B'Mila. The one who does the bris, as long as he's involved in the Mila, Chazer, he can go back, Bein al Tzitza Makvin, Bein She'ena Makvin. So he can go back to fix up whether these are tzitzin, these strands, that would invalidate the bris, or whether they would not invalidate the bris. Piresh, however, once he stepped away, once he's completed the work, he can go back for the strands that would invalidate the bris. But if it does not invalidate the bris, he does not go back for it. Whose opinion is this? That once he's already completed the bris and stopped doing the bris, he can no longer go back and complete it. This is the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broika. The Tani we learned. The 14th day that happens on Shabbos, like we said the scenario before. So the 14th day of Nisan, you have to do the Korban Pesach. However, only what's needed for the mitzvah is done on Shabbos. So Mafshit as a Pesach ad Chazid Rabbi Shmuel ben Yochanan ben Broika. Rabbi Yochanan, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broika, Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broika, says that you can only skin the animal down to mid body so that you can remove the innards that have to go on the mizbeach, but the rest you cannot remove it. And the Chachamim, Mafshiten Eskula, the Chachamim say, no, you're allowed to remove all the skin. You can skin the animal all the way. And we saw this earlier in the Masech. So we said, maybe the reason he says you don't have to skin the whole thing is because there's no concept of beautifying the mitzvah. And there, you're going to skin it anyhow. That's not a part of the mitzvah. But over here, if you leave it, the mitzvah that you did is going to be aesthetically wrong. When you have to beautify the mitzvah, perhaps you're allowed to go back even on Shabbos. Hachanami, the Tanya, as we learned that there is a concept of beautifying a mitzvah. We say in Az Yashir, the song of the sea, this is my God, and I will make him my dwelling place. But the drash is, Va'anvehu, I will make him beautiful. Hisna elefanav b'mitzvahs, that the mitzvahs we do should be beautiful. Asay elefanav sukkah, make a beautiful sukkah. V'lulavna, and make get a nice lulav. V'shofarna, the shofar should be beautiful. Tzitzisna, your garment and the strands, the tzitzis should be beautiful. Sefer Torah na, a nice Sefer Torah, because of Lishmai, Bidyon, and when you write the Torah for Hashem's name, write it with nice ink, B'kumas na, and a nice quill, B'laveler, Uman, and a skilled scribe, V'korcha b'shirayim naim, and you wrap the Sefer Torah in a beautiful mantle. So we know we do a mitzvah, we beautify the mitzvah. So too over here, in regards to the bris milah, maybe it's true that a carbon pesach, Rabbi Yishmael says it's enough to keep the carbon pesach as is, just skin it halfway, because there's no concept of beautifying. You're in the midst of doing the mitzvah. But by bris, if you're going to leave it that way, the mitzvah will have done in a not nice way. That's not okay. You have to go back, perhaps even on Shabbos, on account of his mitzvahs. Make the mitzvahs beautiful. So we can't prove it from Rabbi Shmuel. So rather, we're going to look and after Shabbos, we will see the other opinions that this could be, and continue with this concept of what is done for the bris and the healing of the baby.